you have the award for the most sort of sustainable title today, with the well, your ideas for online teaching, but the one in the program, the reduce, reuse, and recycle. So, Charles, when you're ready, over to you.
Oh, thank you, and thank you very much for letting me speak at this conference. Even if we are online, it's nice to be able to share some things, and the talks so far have been really interesting. So I feel rather lonely with this talk, because many people have had other people with them to talk. I will try and keep an eye on the chat, and feel free to type in the chat throughout the talk. So if people want to type hello in any language, Kevin kind of did this earlier, so he got there first, but feel free to type away during the talk, and I will also try and answer questions after that are in the Q&A afterwards. Right, so very quick intro to me. So these slides I'll make available. They're in the abstract, and I can type them in the chat afterwards. Basically, I do lots of different kinds of teaching, and that's what this slide is for. I forgot to start my timer, but I'll try and keep to the 15 minutes. And my aim with 5 topics in 15 minutes is that I'm kind of going to give 5 lightning talks. So for each thing, I'll try and indicate why I was doing it, or why I think it's a good idea. Something that was unexpected as a good point about it, and then something that wasn't so good, and maybe how I resolved that. It's nice to do things in 3s, which is why I like to do it in this way. So a sort of warning to start with is that it seems very difficult to disentangle what is really the best practice, or what's good practice, and what's just style. And so I can't promise that these 5 things will be good practice, and I can't even promise that they'll be good style. So I hope you enjoy them anyway. And the aim is that they're maybe reusable, which is one of the aims for this conference. Right, so the aim is to be reducing workload by reusing some ideas or questions, and recycling old things and old questions and so on. So this is the first thing. So this is a screenshot, and I found I used Zoom. I mean, other things are rather similar in what they offer, but for getting an idea of what students are thinking, you can prepare something rather fancy like this question, and then allow students to annotate the screen, or you can just have a true-false style question, which is very quick. And so on Zoom, you can then allow people to annotate the screen, and students can then be voting live. So they're like ticking what they think the answers are. And I'll explain good and bad things about this. So you can also then show them what the answers are and what's the idea. So students are using the annotate function. What it's based on is just some student interaction. It's quite nice to get chat from students, but sometimes as was illustrated, I suppose, by my saying to say hello, you generally don't get that many responses. And if you've got a larger group, then getting student interaction can be really quite difficult. And an unexpected benefit of just doing this, so I used polls, but then I used this, put up a true-false style question. And an unexpected benefit was that it's actually quite fun. And you see all these ticks or smiley faces and things appear on the screen as you're going, which is good, because students can see that everyone is contributing. And an unexpected issue, of course, if they're all contributing, then some of them are getting the wrong answers. And a previous Talmo speaker in another Talmo conference said about then putting students into breakout rooms to get them to discuss their answers. And they said it didn't work. And I thought, well, yeah, it didn't work for me either. I would put the students into breakout rooms, and I did this in the first session, and they would come back and the voting wouldn't change. So what was the resolution to this? Now, in some of the other talks today, there have been other solutions, and I think they're very good. My simple solution was just to not tell them the correct answer, but to give them an example to think about. And that example would be intended to highlight what the correct answer was. So Again, this is style, or is it good practice? Is it best practice? I'm not sure, but this is what I did for it. Okay, so these numbers, this is talk number 2. They're very small down here, and they're all quite small numbers as well. And these numbers, they're all minutes, for those particularly eagle-eyed people. These are the video lengths for my videos that I made for teaching. So the idea is, what video lengths would you like? And these are all very short in minutes. And what was I basing it on? Well, I know there's some research that says shorter video lengths are beneficial because students have shorter attention spans. And the main reason was to be able to introduce each topic, because every single video could have a title, and also to get students to reflect on what I've covered, because hopefully, rather than just listening and being this passive observer, you can be thinking, okay, we've done that definition now. And an unexpected benefit was it was useful for revision for students because it had everything in topics. And an unexpected issue was students complained a bit. Well, there were some comments by students saying that the video service we used didn't offer you have watched this sort of service as YouTube does. So hello, YouTube. And this was a problem, but I think that indicated that if a student doesn't know whether they've watched the video on the definition of a group, then they probably haven't got good enough notes from the video on what a definition of a group is. So I wish I'd made gapped notes to fix that. And I did, as a solution, make a PDF that tried to do this, but I wish I'd done it at the beginning. So that's point number 2. And this is what the course looked like. So it was broken down by weeks in folders. I had the first 6 weeks of the course, and each week it says the things that they're going to cover. And then in a given week, so this is week 1, this is Blackboard, and it uses learning. I use learning modules, and then all the videos are in each of these. And this is then within the learning module, this is what it looks like. So this is the first one, definition of a group. And one thing I tried to do as well, which is this point 3, is that for the videos, I tried to break them up with questions. So before and after a video, which is very short, I think this is a 4-minute video, to have some questions to get students to reflect on what they're covering, what they're seeing. And also exercises between them and quizzes. So Blackboard quizzes are quite reasonably easy to make, and you're sort of reusing questions that you would have in the notes in some cases. So what's it based on? Well, I just want to get them to reflect on what they're doing and not just watch the video seamlessly. Otherwise, there's no point in having them as small videos. A benefit was that it made me think about why the course was set up in the way it was. So it's the first time I'd ever lectured this course, and it made me think, well, why are we covering this definition, and when should we cover it? Because you've not got this seamless flow of a 20-minute video or whatever. And having these quizzes and questions between makes you think about what you want students to reflect on. I had low usages in about the second week for some of the quizzes, and I couldn't understand why. And this is because Blackboard hides them by default. But the other issue, the main issue really, was that I would make the link up between these non-assessed quizzes and the weekly homeworks really clear, because neither of them are for credit. And the quizzes can be used for certain types of questions. And so those types of questions I could then try to avoid in the homework questions. And that's what I've said I'll do for next time. So what's the idea? Can you, by sort of pausing between the videos, can you make your course feel a bit more like one-to-one tutoring? And that's why it's really interesting with Thomas's first talk about how they try to do this by actually having a person there to listen to them. Right, so this is point 3 of 5. So we've done 3 lightning talks. This is another thing that I'm going to reuse, which is how the course begins. So I'm sure, like a lot of people, in a mad rush to make videos at the beginning of the course, and the beginning of the course is generally recapping things that students are expected to know from prerequisites. And you've realized you need to deliver a lot of content, but recapping lectures are really quite a difficult thing in some sense, because what we're trying to do is we're trying to recap maybe half of a 12-week course that they'll need for your course, and you're trying to do that in a week. So, and bearing in mind as well, some of these students, if they're coming in and the average is, let's say, 60% from the prerequisite, then that means they didn't understand maybe a third of the content from the prerequisite. So covering it very quickly in a 1 week or 2 week recap is something that I'm not going to do in the future. And I'm going to use the videos to do this. So there's a lot to recap. And my plan is to do, so I lectured Linear Algebra 2, which is a second year course. And my plan is, within that, the example of the space of polynomials and the spaces of functions are very important. So my intention is that I will just introduce those examples and find things like linearly independent sets and bases and span, whether they span and so on. And dimension. And if students are unaware of some of those words or what I'm doing, I can give them the videos that I made this year. So that's one of the things I'm going to do. And so what's the idea? More and more elaborate animation, and about how we can use these videos for the future. And then this could be a talk on its own, really. Why do we have small group teaching in mathematics? And I think the delivery of lectures, many people are saying they're going to flip their classrooms, and that actually the online can be beneficial in replacement of lecturing. I think small group teaching is particularly difficult to do in the online setting. And so I just wanted to comment on what I did before, which was I really want students talking to each other and thinking about things in the course. So we have tutorials, and this is for a second year tutorial, which is about a group of 25 students. So these are notes for me, and then I would write up the headings for these on the board before, as students were coming in. And then I would add some extra details and basically explain the questions that I wanted them to do. So when I moved to online, I did something very similar. I shared an iPad screen. I had a warm-up, just as I'd have a warm-up over here. I've just cut it off the plan. And I'd give them some questions and talk them through what I'd want them to do. And then they'd work individually or maybe in groups if they live together, but they'd work on them. And so one thing I changed with this is basically I changed from this plan and I think I'll cover this in a bit, but I changed, instead of doing the interaction in this way where each of them can't speak to each other, I did this instead. So I wrote out the same sort of plan, but in more detail. And then I shared this PDF with the students and put them into breakout rooms. So they have a warm-up problem that they come in and work on, and they can ask, it basically tests the key ideas they'll need for the session. And then they were in breakout rooms for the whole session. And so that's why I'm saying here, how much can be prepared beforehand? Well, you can write out this whole document before, which means you can share a lot of information with the students. And then you can also, I made videos that went through the solutions of these that I released after the session. So in that way, students can reflect on what they've covered. And this was based in part on the way that we have run some writing workshops at Bristol, and the people involved in those writing workshops are these people down here. Right, so what's the idea? What would you like from a small group session? So I haven't got the minute. I knew I would use up my time and not have the minute. But as as a plenary, as a thing to get people to reflect on, you could have a think, the 5 things that I've mentioned, and which might you adapt, because you might already have some of these resources yourself. And there might be other talks today about how people deliver their small group teaching or their lectures and how you might use those. So a few final other ideas. As students come in, saying hello to them seem to be a nice way to start. Sometimes you'd never see their face throughout the whole sessions, but them having a question to work on as they come in and just saying hello based on the name that they give in Zoom just seemed a nice way to start things. When they're in the breakout rooms, I would type and chat to them, and I'd also pop in and see them. And at the end of the session, I'd then pull everyone back into the main room and maybe use something like the off-the-cuff poll of writing something and letting them annotate to say how they feel about things, or which questions they preferred, or what things we'd covered. So these are the 5 things, and that's the end of my time. So thank you very much for listening.
Brilliant. Many thanks indeed, Charles. Again, Talmo, round of applause. And thanks for kind of a really sort of reflective talk. I think you've kind of put into words a number of things that people have been sort of playing through their minds about, how might we do this differently. And I think thanks also for the plugs to previous Talmo events, and clearly some ties here with the things that Mark and Thomas in particular were talking about. So fantastic, thank you. I don't see any questions in the Q&A, but if anyone's got anything, please do drop them in for Charles. But Charles, if I may ask one that continues the reflective theme, that imagine you could kind of parachute yourself back to this time last year. What would you tell yourself? What would you do differently, or what would you tell yourself based upon the experience of this year?
Okay, yeah, almost feels like an interview question. Well, I mean, one thing is that the changing of the tutorial format, I felt that was quite a risk, because I just, in week 6 or 7, so about halfway through the 2nd term, I just thought, well, I'm going to try this, because I'd much rather just have them in breakout rooms working on things than watching me just sat there waiting for them to work on their own. So it would have been quite easy to apply that from week 1. I was surprised as well. I don't think I really lost any students doing that. So I should have really had a feedback thing as well, and saying that this, I mean, I know people are going to say this on an online setting, but I didn't include feedback as an oversight, really. I didn't think about putting it in there, but the students were very positive about this putting into breakout rooms business for the tutorials, for the whole tutorial. So that would be one thing. And I suppose it was difficult with the lecturing, because I hadn't lectured the course before. So it's always difficult when you inherit a course to know what you'll do with it. But yeah, I suppose knowing these 5 things would have helped. But the Talmo event actually did cover some of the ideas that we could have for teaching, because that was why Talmo started, right? Yeah,
we'll make sure you get your payment later, because that's another plug. Thanks, Charles. But Jessica's just sort of posted it in the chat about their students absolutely hating breakout rooms. And I think this is the one big challenge I think we've all found online, is how we kind of get that interaction, and it's perhaps easier to be a bit more anonymous. So I think
I agree as well with that, because I said earlier that I tried putting them into breakout rooms for a few minutes to get them to discuss stuff, and they did seem to hate that. But when it's the same group every week and you can put them into groups, they seemed a bit happier on that. So I don't know. I think small group teaching is something that's really very difficult to do online.
And can be challenging in real life as well, but
yeah,
so online. Brilliant. Thanks again for that, Charles. Please do post any questions or tag Charles in, and I'm sure we'd be happy to respond. But again, yeah, thank you for a great reflective talk.